Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Collective Clicks podcast. This is your host, Brandon Bateman. And today I'm joined by Hannah. She works with REI Closings. We talked a lot about her experience through scaling a transaction coordination company. What are the places that investors are losing money through the transaction coordination process, and how have they figured out how to plug those holes? I'll see you there. Hannah, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you as well. So for anybody who doesn't know who you are, what's the background? Who are you? What company are you with?
So my name is Hannah. I am a problem solver, transactions coordinator, lots of different things, but I work with REI Closings. I currently act as their brand development and strategic partnerships manager. So working on investment deals in all 50 states, all types of deals. That is what I'm here to talk about.
All right. I just have to know, like, how many deals have you personally taken through the finish line?
I personally have transacted over 380 deals in the last 4 years. I have also acted as a manager for other people's transactions, like a team lead, being involved in probably another 1,200 or so over the last 4 years. And then I own an investment property of my own, so it's never a dull moment.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think this is really cool, right? Because everybody listening to this podcast has generally, I know the audience of this podcast is relatively savvy, right? These are people who are doing deals, who have like real businesses, not just, I'm a guy who does deals. They're more like a business that does deals. So, and I think that's really cool. But the cool thing about you is you have just so much expertise in just this like one specific part of transaction coordination, more so than anybody could have if they're doing everything else at the same time, which is where most people are. So I think that's pretty cool. While you have this, you have just a ton of super relevant experience to just that one thing. It's hard to find. And it's kind of cool to think about. Like there's a short list of people in the world who maybe know more about transaction coordination in real
It's a
estate
scary
investing.
thought. It's a scary
Yeah.
thought for sure. And there's so many different sectors of real estate. I remember there was always this joke, in college I worked at a bar, and there was always the joke that after you bartend, you go into real estate, right? That's what everybody does. And the only thing I knew of was being a realtor, right? Obviously there are lenders and there are inspectors and things like that, but then you get into investment real estate, right? Not even normal real estate. And then there's so many subsectors in that. There's goodness, unlimited different types of deals, and then it changes in every state that you go into, and it's almost impossible to be an expert at everything, but it does feel really good to have found a niche in this and to get to share that with the world, because everything I know, I did not know 5-6 years ago, and it's valuable stuff.
Yeah, fair enough. And I'm excited to explore some of those things. I think one thing, if we were to pick like the least interesting part of a real estate investing business, I'd argue transaction coordination is probably like what we would look for. On several occasions, I've asked David, what is wrong with you? What caused you to pursue this business? He like took like the worst part of the business and said, you know what, I'm just gonna do that all the time. That seems like it's not very fun. But it is crazy how in like the boring things there's so much profit to be had in the business by figuring out how to do those well. I'm curious to hear from your perspective. Obviously, like transaction coordination, if a deal is really simple, is more simple. And there's also gaps where quality transaction coordination is actually going to yield the company more revenue than transaction coordination that's not quality, right? Because maybe deals would have fallen through without that transaction coordination. So if we really look at the value of this, like this could be a true like revenue generating piece of the business, or another way to think of it is a place that loses revenue in the business. It could be like a hole in the bucket if it's not managed properly. To what extent do you feel like that's true? And what examples do you have? Like what's happening in all these deals that you've done? What opportunities are there that you've seen people miss or take advantage of?
That is a loaded question because I have 1,000 stories, but I'm going to start with a reference from David Old's playbook here. We always say that investors are the Tom Brady of their business, right? They're out on the field scoring touchdowns, winning the Super Bowl. They're not sitting on the bench making sure everyone has water. They are not making sure that the uniforms are ready to go for game day. They are not running payroll. I mean, as a business owner, obviously, you need to run payroll, but the concept being that you rely on other people that have different areas of expertise. You might know how to be a water boy, and that's great, but that's not what you need to be doing to be leading your team to success.
It's
And
also, sorry to interrupt you, but I feel like
no,
it's
you're
kind of
good.
that's also an element of typical revenue generating activities versus admin stuff too.
Yeah.
Right? Like one way that I've explained or I think about it in my business is like you picture your brain, and your brain does a lot of things, right? And if you picture like the operations side of your brain, that's largely the part that's like keep the heart beating, so we're like pumping blood through this body, or like the part of you that like breathes without even like thinking that you have to breathe. It just like naturally happens that like somehow 24 hours a day for our entire lives we have breathed constantly, and we don't have to try to do that. And then there's the part of you that says, I see that thing over there, I want to go walk towards that mountain and I want to climb it, or whatever the case is. And it's kind of like the two portions of it. And it's crazy because in our body it just happens so flawlessly, so naturally, right? We never think, oh my goodness, I forgot to make sure my heart was beating like 10 minutes ago. It just happens. But in business, so often you see the guy who's like running up the mountain, meanwhile his heart stopped beating because he
Yeah.
forgot to make sure that somebody's making sure the heart is beating. So anyways,
No,
it's
that's
the
a really
analogy I
great.
find helpful.
Yeah, that's a really great analogy. And I think as an investor myself, I see a lot of investors and entrepreneurs who have that mindset of I'm going to do everything and I'm going to do all of it really well. And that never works out. The people who think that this hustle mentality, I can do everything, I think it's a great thing to have instilled in you, to be desiring to learn new skills and to progress in your professional and personal endeavors. But the reality is, if you're trying to build something and you're trying to grow something, and even you have to step back and you have to hire people that are smarter than you at doing certain things. If I knew everything there was to know about lending and inspections and transactions coordinating and foreclosures and you name it, every subsector under the sun in real estate, I would be going crazy because I wouldn't be able to do everything to the quality level that I want to do that actually helps me grow my business. And that's it's a humbling reminder for a lot of investors.
Yeah, yeah, totally makes sense. It's one of those things. It's like one of those like trite things that everybody says that you just kind of like everybody hears it and everybody's yeah, I get it, but that doesn't apply to me. And until they actually learn the lesson and realize that does apply to you, like the laws of the universe, you are not exempt from like the laws that naturally everybody else has to abide by. So it's
And you
crazy
still
like how like the number of people who like understand what you just said versus apply what you just said is a massive gap.
Yeah, the application of it is really difficult. And I'll tell you, I think I see a lot of people that get really excited about, oh, I made $200,000 this year. That's great. How many entrepreneurs actually sit back and break down how much time they spent on those things and what their cost per hour is? And I say this, on a whim in a beautiful, perfect, ideal world. Say, for example, my rate is $150 an hour, right? How many hours do I spend doing this task? And can I hire somebody to do it cheaper than me? That is what we have to be thinking about every layer of our business that way. Yes, you have to train for quality. Yes, you have to hire for quality. Yes, you have to know what to look for. But the lost revenue is something I think people don't take into consideration enough. They're looking at revenue gain, they're looking at growth, but everybody's going to become stagnant at some point until they start looking at what that lost revenue is costing them. And for a lot of people, in what we do in transactions coordinating, that is the cost of a lost deal or the cost of the time it takes to get a deal across the finish line that could be better spent doing income producing activities for that company.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. It's this concept. I think it was Derek Sivers that said that saying no makes your yes more powerful.
Yeah.
And by saying no to I will spend all my hours doing transaction coordination, I'm saying yes to I'm going to be investing more into my acquisitions team. I'm going to be investing more into understanding the metrics and what's happening in my company or whatever it is. It's like the highest leverage thing, right? If you think about it, that's kind of the game of being a business owner is understanding like where your time is highest leverage.
And knowing where your skills lie too. I mean, not every part of business is fun. There are parts of my job that I hate doing, but they're super necessary. And I know I sit there when I'm doing them. I'm doing one of them right now this week that I'm like, gosh, 2 months from now, I'm going to thank myself. But right now I hate it so much. And
Yeah.
yeah, same is true when you're doing your deals. You have to do certain components of it that you don't want to, and then you recognize where you need to focus that energy and outsource the other part. So that's what we do. That's what we're here to help with.
Yeah, I hear you on that. So so I think it's pretty clear the idea that, well, if an entrepreneur is spending some time on this, then that's time they could be doing other things that's going to grow their business. Let's talk about the other side of that too, though. What can a true expert in transaction coordination do? Help paint this picture for me. Like, you take the top transaction coordinator in the world. Like, what does their execution of transaction coordination look like compared to what a lot of entrepreneurs would do themselves? And is it possible that it could be done better and that's also a revenue generation activity?
Yes, that's a really great question, and one that I get asked a lot, because a lot of times when I'm speaking to an investor, their concern is, oh, what is the cost to hire you? And I'll just, before I get into all the nitty gritty, we're far cheaper than hiring somebody, and we are very stringent in how we train our employees. So all of our transactions coordinators go through a process in which they have to take tests after they've learned about certain deal types. They have to actually work on transactions with a team lead in real time. And they basically have to get certified through testing. And so we're not always looking to necessarily hire people that have a background in real estate. When I came into this, I did not have a background in real estate other than construction and property management. I didn't know anything about investing. But being able to train people to be, you don't have to train people to be detail oriented. You don't need to train people to want to have a desire to develop skills. So those are the things that we're looking for when we're hiring transactions coordinators. You can, easily find people online that have taken a 2-hour course and are teed up to do transactions coordinating. And for some people, like you mentioned earlier, those really easy, straightforward deals, maybe that's great. Maybe that's all they need, is that peace of mind that their deal is on track. But I can tell you, just after closing our office, closing over 4,000 transactions, there are things that pop up that you're not going to know the answer to. And if you don't have the I'll figure it out mentality, if your transactions coordinator doesn't, then it's not going to go anywhere. Every single person on my team is here in office, and they're utilizing each other. So I'll give an example. One of my coordinators was working on a foreclosure deal a couple of weeks ago. It was a newer foreclosure deal for her. She had done some in the past, but this one was a really tight timeline. There's another girl in my office who does a lot of our foreclosure handlings. And she got on the phone with the bank, and she spent almost 20 hours over the course of a couple of days on the phone with the bank, getting the foreclosure auction delayed so that we could close. Because I think the auction was like in 3 days, and closing was like 2 days after that. And we didn't need that much time. But the dedication to sitting down and actually putting in that time and knowing the right questions to ask. You don't know the right questions to ask unless you've been trained, or unless you have access to people who have asked those questions or encountered those experiences in the past, or without just having that I'll figure it out mentality. So I know that's kind of a long-winded answer, and I didn't get into all the details of some of the things that we do, but what you're looking for when you're hiring isn't necessarily someone who's worked in real estate. It's someone who is going to sit down and figure it out no matter what. Because at the end of the day, if your deal doesn't close, then we don't have you as a client, right? And we are dedicated to building a long-term relationship. So in a regular deal, that can look like a lot of things. Like I mentioned, sitting on the phone with a foreclosure attorney, trying to get an extension to an auction. It can look like working with bankruptcy attorneys to time the release of a bankruptcy so that it doesn't get foreclosed on. It can look like dealing with erratic sellers. I've had my fair share of those. It can look like bothering buyers to submit their EMD, even though they said, oh yeah, I'll do it. Oh yeah, I'll do it. Following up with them every couple hours. There is no limit to what we will do to get the deal done. I mean, and you can pay to put me on a plane and fly me out to New Jersey to go knock on somebody's door, but you probably want to call somebody else who's local and going to do that for cheaper than putting me on a plane. So, whatever it takes, we're really there to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I think that attitude is huge. And I think anybody who's hired a lot of people realizes that that attitude's not super easy to find.
No.
It feels like you find it more than you train it. You
Yeah.
need the culture that creates it for sure. So it can be like there, but dormant if you don't have the right culture that brings it out. But yeah, it's crazy how much of a difference that it means when you have like someone who's willing to check all the boxes versus somebody who's willing to do whatever it takes to
And the
get the deal.
teamwork mentality is huge there, like you said. And I say this to our clients and investors as well. Even though we're in the business of transactions, we're really in the business of relationships. So if we're cultivating each other, not just in the transaction itself, but as a whole, then we're more likely to be successful together, just like we would in any relationship. If I was dating someone and I went to them and told them, hey, I need this from you, I need this from you, great. It's one-sided. It feels transactional. There's not something there that I can rely on in a difficult time. Our team actually has a client relations specialist named Angela, and she is there to check in with our clients every week, every other week, every month, not just to talk about their transactions, but to talk about what's changing on their end. Are they using a new CRM? Did they move offices? Did somebody have a baby? Do we need to send a graduation gift? Genuinely, they are part of our family. And in doing that, our employees feel like they're part of something too. So everybody wants to stay much longer when the relationship is valued. And I see a big push in the professional world towards more of that than there was before. But, the last couple of decades have really been this hustle culture mentality, which doesn't always translate well to good relationships.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. I'm curious to hear from you. This comes from my own curiosities more than anything else. As you've been kind of working alongside this company to help, as I understand it, you were kind of there day one, right?
I was a
And
founding
you
member,
guys,
yes.
yeah, you guys have grown from doing a few transactions to doing a large number of transactions, which scaling that operationally is pretty difficult. And I'm sure better than I do, the complexities that can come with each deal, the ample opportunities there are to drop the ball. And I'm sure you guys drop the ball sometimes. If you're like
Not
any
perfect.
like a real company, then I'm sure you do, right? But but how have you figured out how to deliver consistently really well, despite the fact that it's bigger, despite the fact that there's always little things that are different, despite the fact that you can't train everybody on every possible thing they could encounter?
That's a really great question. Oh, sorry, I'm going to give you a little bit of background as to how we got to where we are now, because it was a very consistent process of refinement. What worked one month, we might be talking about something totally different the next month, and that kind of led us all to where we are today in our audit process for our internal teams and accountability. But when we first started Easy, it was me sitting in a room with probably 100 files by myself and I didn't really know what to expect. We had a one-page seller form that needed to be filled out. We were working with 3 nationwide title companies, and in our minds we thought, oh, okay, well, we just have 3 and they can do all 50 states, then it'll be just really easy. We'll build really good relationships with these 3 companies. That was a terrible idea. We love our nationwide partners, but the differences state to state are so drastic sometimes that you need someone local. And a title company or attorney that might do one type of transaction might not do another. They might do an ovation but not an installment, or they'll do an owner finance but not a wholesale. And so that was one of the first transitions we made operationally, was to start expanding our network of title companies. Now, today, we have over 500 title company and attorney partners nationwide that have all been vetted by us. We ask them about 50 questions when we bring them on to make sure we understand what they can and cannot do. Can they do a blind closing statement? Can they do split closings? What is their notary charge? I want to be able to answer every question in any possible scenario. And then on top of that, we saw the need to have even more control. And so we opened our own title company, Easy Title and Escrow, which is licensed in Tennessee, Georgia, Kentucky, Florida, Texas, and Ohio, and constantly expanding. So the progression of that alone was like, me in a room with 3 title companies to now having over 500 and owning our own. We saw the need. That did not happen overnight. That was trial and error. That was me on the phone with New York attorneys at 11 p.m. because they were in court all day trying to make sure that they knew what I needed them to do and we were going to be on the same page and that we were in compliance. And that is sitting in that uncomfortability for many, many years. Same with our platform. So one of the most unique parts of our service is all of our clients have access to a secure deal tracking platform where they can see their deal move from contract to close through different phases. And not only that, we are really, really detailed about keeping notes. So anytime the coordinator sent a text or an email or called or talked to a title company, they're writing that down in real time. So the investor can log in at 3 a.m. and see what's going on. And so our system also progressed. We recognized that investors wanted to clearly see when EMD had been received. They clearly wanted to see the last time we made contact with the seller. So our system, we added and added and added to it. And then we created a tiered team structure. So we recognized that we needed accountability within the office, that not everybody who came in was going to have the skills. So all of our coordinators are under a team lead, and each team lead is under a transactions manager that works with client relations so that they're getting the client-facing feedback side of it and the file-facing feedback side of it, which just creates more accountability all around. If John Smith is a client and he's moving his family across the country this week, and he told Angela, well, his files need extra attention this week. So our processes change, our systems change, and all in all, we ended up creating an audit system. So each of our coordinators gets graded each week on certain tasks. Did they contact the seller within every 7 days? Did they contact the buyer every 7 days? Did they get the title commitment back on time? So they have certain KPIs they have to meet, and then they get graded on those. And their team as a whole also gets graded with those individual scores. So it gives them that teamwork accountability. They don't want to let their team down. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but we had absolutely no idea that we would have what we have now until we started doing it. And I think I posted this on Facebook the other day. It was like, just create the thing, you can make it better later. Because what you create now is always going to change as you identify new things. And you can't be afraid of that because it's inevitable.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And those examples give a little clarity into like how you guys think about the operations. Now I'm thinking from the standpoint of an investor that's trying to figure out what to do with their transaction coordination. I know for a lot of those investors, you're going to say, well, what's the right thing to do? It's going to be to outsource your transaction coordination to easy REI Closings, right? Which I'm sure is a fantastic option. But help me understand if I am an investor, when does it make sense for me to do it myself, if ever? And when does it make sense for me to hire a dedicated transaction coordinator in-house?
That can be a very individually tailored question. I will tell you that when I was working with David Olds and his wholesaling company, we found that at about 5 open transactions, so not like necessarily 5 closings a month, but like 5 that you have actively pending under contract with the seller in any phase, that's when it almost became too much. Things would get lost or be forgotten. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're trying to do even more deals, maybe 10 at a time, you have to also be proactive in hiring proactively, whether that's somebody in office or outside of the office. I also think that there's something really valuable about, well, there's 3 really components in my brain that make a successful investor. And one is learning, the desire to consistently learn. One is taking action, and then one is recognizing when it's time to outsource. So there are investors out there that I call Pokemon Go players, and all they're doing is just learning. They're just catching all these courses and they're not really doing anything with it. Then there's people who are taking action, but they're not really learning anything new. So I'm always going to applaud an investor who takes the time to learn, and it also wants to do the action themselves. It's humbling. I've had many people come to me and be like, I did my first 10 wholesale deals by myself. I don't know what half of these words mean. I don't have time to learn. Can you figure it out? There's a whole other language in title. We call it speaking abstract. It's a whole other language. And so if you don't have time to learn it, that's okay to admit. So I would say, normally after someone has closed, 5 to 10 deals, or they have more than 5 open at a time. We are built for all levels of investors. So we have clients that are regularly closing anywhere between 20 and 100 deals a month. And we have other investors who are maybe closing one every 6 months. And that's okay. We're designed for both. And we'd rather be a tool in their tool belt to guide them and mentor them and help them learn about the things along the way than to leave them hanging on their own. And hopefully over time, showing them what we're about makes them not want to leave. And that's usually been our experience.
Okay, understood. So I think that added some clarity for me of when does it make sense to hire a transaction coordination company? When does it make sense though to have your own transaction coordinator, to have one or three transaction coordinators in-house?
That can depend. I have worked with quite a few clients who either came to us with a transactions coordinator already in place or hired one at some point in the process of working with us. I have typically found that our clients bring on someone in-house administratively when they are at the point of having between 20 and 30 open files at a time. And that can vary based on need. So I have a client who has an in-house transactions coordinator, but they still work with us and we still handle all the title work. We still handle all the communications, but she is our point of contact with the client so that the owner isn't managing all the communications with us. She is. And if we say, oh, we need an addendum, this contract expires tomorrow, you guys don't have a buyer, she's going to take that back to her team and make sure it gets handled. And a lot of times, because that person might be an administrative person, they can also do other tasks, but it cuts down on them having to necessarily train them on all the nuances involved. So I see some of our bigger, maybe coaching clients that have in-house coordinators for a season and use us, here or there for one or two more complex deals. But our ideal situation would be to work with an investor who has an in-house admin person. The odds of them training that in-house admin person to the level of experience that's held within our office is slim to none, but we're there to also help teach them things along the way by doing the transaction alongside them. So there's really no world in which I would say an investor doesn't also need us. We would like to work with them, and every good entrepreneur at some point hires an administrative assistant to keep them sane. I'm sure you have one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I would speak similarly about marketing, because what people do is so agencies, the way they work, like you said, you don't necessarily have to hire people that have experience. And I'm sure you have some that have experience, but really like what agencies tend to be really good at is growing talent. And you could take somebody who hasn't done transaction coordination before, and you plug them into your system. And through that process, they become very skilled and able to solve these problems on a really high level. And the mistake that we see are like companies in digital marketing making sometimes is they try to hire like the same kind of marketing person that we would hire, but they don't have the system for that person. And they don't realize that, well, how much does the transaction coordinator have to cost per year? In salary or something like that. There's a number, but then there's a different number of what they have to cost if you don't have the system to put them in for them to be incredible, because they have to then be the person capable of building that system, which is actually a really expensive hire compared to.
I was going to say that's not an entry level position hire, somebody that wants to build the system for you. If you find one of those people, pay them a lot of money.
Yeah, that's like a 6-figure job versus you're probably dealing with not a 6-figure job if you're just talking about like the transaction coordination, like day-to-day work. That's why agencies exist. If you think about like how does the business model even exist, is they create extra value in the world through having those systems and through having those processes and those quality control things, and they've done this over and over again, so they already know the common things you're going to run into as problems and all that kind of stuff, right? Like that net adds value.
I've actually had a client leave before and hire a transactions coordinator in-house, and within a couple of months come back to us because, one, we were cheaper. Some people, don't like the idea of paying us upfront for a deal or paying us a subscription fee each month based on their volume. But the reality is we are the cheapest and best option. And you can argue that, but then you start sacrificing quality, pretty significantly. And so, it is funny to see that happen and then see those people come back. But, your system matters a lot. And we're really proud of the system that we've built here for sure.
Sure. Yeah, I can tell you have like that mindset when we ask like, how are you succeeding? You've really focused on two things. You focused on one, we care about the people, and two, we build the environment where they can thrive and where they can be really great at what they do. And that for me inspires a lot of trust in what you guys do, which is really cool. So for anybody listening that wants to get a hold of you guys, what's the best way?
Yeah, so they can go to my personal Facebook page if they like. You can find me, Hannah Wharton. My links are all in my bio. You can also find us at easyreiclosings.com, where you can book a free discovery call to chat with one of our business development specialists. And we really like to hear about your business and what of our plans is going to be the best fit.
All right, amazing. Thank you so much, Hannah, for taking the time to be on the podcast today.
Thanks
and
for having
everybody
me,
else
Brady.
listening, I will see you next week.